Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everybody to a new installment of our series on FSR Insights. Today, we have a new topic, always about developments in European energy and climate policy. We are going to discuss contracts for differences. And in particular, you will hear from Lena Kitzing some of the insights from a report that the Florence School of Regulation published with her as lead author only a couple of months ago. So I would like to welcome Lena, first of all. She's assistant professor at the Danish Technical University, where she is also head of the division on wind energy systems. And she's also a part-time professor at FSR, where she delivers together with Mario Ragwitz our training on regulation and integration of renewable energy sources. But it's not only Lena. As you know, the format of this series foresees some discussants, because we want to drill a bit our key guest. And today we have from our team Sofia Nicolai, who works at FSR with the electricity team. And then we have Jorn Rickstein from Aurora Energy Research. You just changed job a few weeks ago. You are now, if I read correctly, research lead for the Pan-European Power and Carbon Markets unit. Before, for many years, you were in Berlin at the IW, so the German research center, where you did a lot of research in the past on electricity markets, and not only. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for accepting our invitation. The format, I think we have already many participants, so we are going immediately. I'm going immediately to pass the screen to Lena. Just as a general introduction, CfDs are really an important topic at FSR. We follow them closely. As you know, they are one of the tools that we want to use to promote the massive penetration of renewables in, let's say, a short period of time. But I don't know more than that. So, Lena, the screen is yours for 15, 20 minutes, please.
Well, thank you so much, Nicolo, and also for having me here. And I'm looking forward to the discussion after my short talk. I'll try to keep it short because, of course, it's a topic, and also you're leading up to it in the title. There is really a lot of details that could be talked about. All right, so let me share my screen, and then there you go. Does that work all right? Yes, okay, perfect. So my intention with the next 15-20 minutes is to lead you through some of the main conclusions of the report, give you a bit of introduction to CfDs, but it will not be very thorough. So if you need more basic information, I think you can either look into the report. We've also made an FSR Insights edition already in the beginning of last year, where we were a little bit more on the a little bit more high level on the basics. So that's also worthwhile maybe revisiting at some point. So today it's more about the design details and maybe also giving some input to the European debate. As you all know, contracts for difference have become quite hot topic in European electricity market debate, because they have been lifted into the EMD, the electricity market reform discussions, and are the instrument that's chosen by the European Commission to support renewable energy in the future. And until now, we only have 9, maybe 10 member states who have experience with contracts for difference in renewable support. So there is a lot a lot of newcomers to the topic, and also a lot of things to think about in terms of contracts for difference design. So let me see. Yeah. Yes. So basically, Nicola asked me 2 questions to talk about today. I tried to put it into the context here. And in case I forget to come to any conclusions, I put them onto the first slide. So you're sure to get away from it. And they all come from this report that Nicola also mentioned. So basically, how to properly design CfD contracts, I would say, context specific. They need to be functional in the context where they're supposed to be working, and then based on, I would say, on an understanding of the technology and the market situation, which is good enough. We don't want to analyze ourselves to death, but which is good enough so that we can design them in a functional way. Understanding of the technology market situation and understanding of the design options and what the choices of these different options have for implication. And that exactly was the purpose of our report also, because we've had this feeling that there are a lot of design options out there and considerations out there that are not always discussed in the depth that they deserve. So that was also a main purpose of the report, to show the different design options, what's already there, how it's already applied, and what are the implications around these options, and also some of the new ideas that we had. That have been discussed in time. We also show that trade-offs are inevitable. CfD design, as all renewable support mechanisms, they have many different dimensions, and not all of them pull into the same direction. There is always a trade-off between the different objectives and counteracting effects. So that's always clear. And that's also one of the main reasons why they need to be context specific, because not all policy objectives are equally weighted in different jurisdictions. And therefore tailor-made, but based on best practice principles and also harmonization where possible. And we can also discuss that further later on, especially in the context of electricity market design and our internal market in the EU. What are the consequences for fragmentation or risk of fragmentation? So, yeah, and how will their massive use impact the functioning of electricity markets is another point that we want to talk about today. So in the report, we describe and we show that it is, in fact, possible to design production-based CfDs that are non-distortive in the day-ahead markets. And is also where we think that the current debate sometimes falls a little bit short, because there are some design choices that make them CfDs be distortive on the day-ahead market, but it's far from the only choice that you can make. There are still intraday issues on the intraday markets, which are similar to all of the other, or most of the other existing support schemes that we see in the market. So that's an issue that we can discuss about. So if we are increasing massively the use of CfDs, the effects of these impacts will also increase. And this is both on mostly on the intraday side, where we still see some effects there. But exactly how much, we haven't seen a lot of quantifications yet. There was a first attempt by Elia this year to make some quantifications, but I think there is a lot of more calculations to be done. Production independent ideas are very compelling because they have less impact on the functionality of electricity markets, as we see it, because they are more distant from physicalities. But there are some open implementation questions that might also affect the markets. So that's my first general intro. We don't see any panacea, not one right design choice that could fit everyone. There are unresolved issues in all of these suggestions, and that makes it a very nice topic to discuss and to research upon further on. All right, so let's move on. I quickly will take you through what CfDs are before we go into the design dimensions, because compared to previous or earlier support instruments, they are actually purely financial. So the state is actually not involved in the selling of the actual power that happens on the power market. They're giving a financial hedge. And the financial hedge that states are giving is a fixed for floating swap. It's a financial derivative. It's not invented for electricity, actually is a very, very large business. Most of the time you see these fixed for floating swaps in currency exchange rates or interest rates trades between B2B business partners. What is a little bit different for renewables is that they are connected to the physical production, usually, right? So you make the fixed for floating swap on a price differential, but then you're multiplying that with some actual production. And this is something that makes it a little bit specific or unique. So what is it that we are paying out in the CfD? Basically, what you can see here is the price on one side and then some hours. It could be different time scales. And if the reference price is moving, that's typically day ahead price, for example. And the strike price is the one that you agree with the government. And then the CfD payout is the rest. So it's topping up your revenues to the strike price that has been agreed on, is therewith stabilizing revenues. The main feature of these CfDs is if the market price is higher than the agreed strike price, there will be a clawback and you give that back. And the government usually, and also as agreed in the electricity market reform in Europe, the government has an obligation to move that money to the consumers so that they all benefit from this. And then if prices fall again, there will be payout again. What happens usually in negative prices, because we've seen more and more negative prices in current CfD designs, is then there is no payout, which then leads oftentimes to a voluntary curtailment because to avoid losses of them in the market. So that's how it looks. The key impact areas of CfDs that we identified in our report are first and foremost closing the profitability gap, because we see renewables need support. They could not be invested in on the market on their own. But also the capping of revenues and then redistribution to end consumers, as I've just shown you in the example, is a key functionality. I think also one of the major reasons it's entered into the electricity market reform and also been discussed upon as a measure that is equivalent to some of these emergency revenue collection measures that we've seen over the past years. Then it should also enable market integration. That's why we started doing CfDs in the first place, as compared to, for example, feed-in tariffs or other instruments where renewables didn't have to operate on the markets, right? So the CfDs oftentimes in many countries were the first instruments that actually forced renewables onto spot markets in the first place. So I think that's also something we shouldn't forget. And then it's about risk allocation. And that's also something that I researched quite a lot on. And this is related to the financing of the renewables and stabilizing the prices, for example. But in general, it's an instrument that allows states to decide where risk should go. And they can do that in many different ways. And why do we need this? Why do governments have to look into risk allocation? This is because on the electricity side, renewable investors cannot hedge on their own. There is currently not enough long-term markets that allow investors to hedge in the amount that they need, right? So you can buy forwards, maximum 5 years, maybe 10 years ahead, not very liquid. PPAs are also not very highly available yet. So addressing these missing long-term markets for hedging as well. So when do we use these CfDs best is if the market, of course, if it does not provide sufficient investment incentives, and this could be either because a hedging problem, it could also be if assets are not profitable, but not only, because sometimes hedging is necessary for bankability, not only for profitability. And the second is regarding these revenue collections. So that's reasons for us on a best practice basis that justify using the CfDs. And then the second is where, in which assets would we put them? Those that have very high upfront investment costs, because those are the ones who are most vulnerable to price fluctuations. And then, basically the ones that need these stabilizations, because either achieving bankability, but also for cost reduction, low cost of capital. So these assets with high upfront investment costs are usually the ones that are wind energy, solar energy, and other things which typically don't use fuel. Also, nuclear power is categorized in that, and you can also find that in the electricity market reform. Okay, so we identified very different, quite a number of different dimensions for CfD design, and I'm sure we can go a bit more into detail later on what you need to discuss on. So this is from the report, and then I try to make it a little bit more visual with these kind of Lego bricks, because what I really try to convey usually is that it's not enough to try to select one of those Lego bricks. You have to actually build a full tower. So your design, CfD design, is only complete if you have picked one, at least one from each of those areas. And I will give you a couple of examples, especially around the reference price design, that can help us understand exactly what we mean and which kind of design considerations we go through, and we also explain in the report. So we're trying to focusing on generation-based CfD designs. You can either choose an hourly reference period, which means that you calculate the price and the top up each hour, as I showed to you in this bar chart. What you also could do is also in this hourly reference period, this is actually giving this produce and forget incentive that we've already that I've already mentioned and that people talk a lot about. But what you also could do is you could do an hourly or you could you can do an hourly reference period. But if you would like to avoid these negative price problems, you can just pause the payout as negative prices. So you can add another element into this design that helps non-distortiveness of the behavior, bidding behavior. What you could also do is you could enlarge the reference period to have a quarterly period. What this means is that you're calculating the payout not on each yellow bar, as I showed before, but you're calculating it once onto the average of all the yellow bars from the last quarter, for example. And what that means, when we started thinking about this kind of reference period, we actually called it a hybrid design because it acts a little bit like a top-up CfD and also a fixed premium, because the premium is always fixed for a full quarter that goes along. But the level of the premium changes, and overall, over the full period, you're actually experiencing stabilized prices, which is a quite clever design because it combines full market exposure in the short term with the price stabilization in the long term. And if you can time these two different timescales towards first the dispatch market, and then second the financing, the bankability period, you can actually reap benefits on both sides. So that is that's quite clever. It introduces a couple of other problems because you can run into periods with very low prices where you also have to pay clawback because it's always fixed for a longer period. Then you need to deal with this package as well. You can do that by introducing a dynamic clawback design. And with this package, actually, with these three Lego bricks together, this would be a non-distortive market design for the day-ahead market. Some distortions remain in the intraday market, which haven't been solved yet. And I would like to tell you here, this is an overview that we also put into the table, into the report. that a lot of the implementations, CfDs implemented in Europe, actually already use these annual, monthly, daily reference periods. Now, if you look into generation independent schemes, the most reasonable choice is the hourly reference period, because you don't have that problem around market dispatch anymore. Here, the problem that you need to have the most considerations around is the what volume you want to calculate your payout on. And here we are. We have heard different ideas around generation independent designs. For example, it could be your forecasted production. And as soon as you delink your payout volume or your payout from the actual production, you don't have any wrong incentives anymore in what you're feeding into the grid, right? So then you could act on the intraday market completely undistorted, and also on the day ahead market completely undistorted. So it's a very compelling idea. Question is then, how do you calculate what are you paying out? You could do that on the forecasted production. You could do it on a mathematical model, for example, based on weather data. You could do it based on a sample of wind plants that are around, or an aggregated wind production in the region if you do it ex post. You could also do it on a technology neutral base profile. There are many different ideas. And you can see I ordered in a way, the further down you go onto that list, the further away is your reference volume that you get paid out from your actual production. And this introduces some kind of basis risk, as we call it in the report. That means that you now have to deal with a deviation, a potential deviation from what you're actually producing and being remunerated on, and what you're actually producing and selling on the market, and what you're being remunerated on in the scheme. It's not necessarily a problem. It's just another source of volatility. You can either try to use it for something good and beat the reference, or you can, be unlucky. But we need to know about that, because it's all about risk allocation. And then there are some practical implementation questions that we haven't solved yet. For example, what is a forecasted production? Yeah, what is the capability that a plant could use? Who is giving which information? Who is allowed to give which information? So that's something that we discuss in the report as well. And then also one argument that we do that we need to acknowledge is that it might be a bit disruptive to the existing support landscape, because until now, most support schemes are based on actual feed-in. And this would be something new to get used to. Not that we haven't done that. We do get used to new things all the time, but it's something that needs to be thought into the process as well. All right, I think I'll need to slowly wrap up. But here, so I gave you a couple of examples on which kind of design packages we look at and what implications they are. And here is an overview of these the different packages that we have in each row. And then we looked into what kind of risks are they addressing, and maybe even exposing investors or producers more. How do they enable market integration, and what are remaining challenges? And you can see, basically, you don't have to go through all of this. You can have a look in the report, but you can see that none of these lines are completely green. Yeah, so there's always these trade-offs. Some behave better in one way, but then they have to create a problem in another. So there are always these trade-offs that we have to deal with. And in the end, it will depend on the current situation in each jurisdiction, on the current also policy landscape, on the market situation, available technology, which ones, and policy objectives, also which ones you would weigh more important than others. Right, so risk exposure is key to understand these CfD designs, and I just wanted to mention that there is these 3 different risks that we talk about, and we can discuss that more. It's the price risk. This is actually not really related to the choice between generation-based or generation-independent. This happens all the time, but there are different considerations. Then we have the volume risk for the production. Mostly this negative price problem, where there is just no support that exists in the generation base, and that could be a real game changer in the future if we don't get the amount of negative prices reined in, I would say. Then there are other volume risk, weather risk exposure that might also be handled in generation independent designs, maybe even in other, but this is the question if we want to do that. And then we have this basis risk question, which is deviating from the reference, could be both on the price or on the volume if we are not paying out to the actual production. Right, I think I will go a little bit.
If you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lena.
So I think I will keep that to the discussion. I haven't come so much into these interactions between the markets and PPAs, but I'm sure we can talk a bit more about that. Overall, my points are they are really diverse in the implementation. You've seen, I hope that this picture with the different Lego bricks and all these different colors helps you to show like, okay, there is quite a lot of options we can put together. And actually, if you look through the different implementations in Europe, there is no one Lego tower that looks exactly the same, right? They all look a little bit different from each other. And it's maybe also a good thing that they are looking very different from each other, because then we can learn, right? We can test this design and get better together collectively. And yeah, I think that I said that some unresolved issues remain with all of these suggestions. So it will be up to the specific implementation how to weigh them. Yeah, but the most important thing is that we are trying to create the adequate design that is adequate and to the context that we are looking into. And this is probably going to give different answers in different areas.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lena. And then, yes, for those that want to know more, there is a training, right? So people have a few weeks still to register for this. It's a very nice training that we do in presence, right, in Florence.
Very good.
So, very interesting report, Lena. This idea of so that there are many CfDs. Actually, when designing the title for this session, we discussed a bit. A title of an Italian book came to my mind. Maybe the Italian audience know one NaN 100,000. It's about identities. What the title of this book refers to. Probably it can refer also to CfDs. There only one CfD, or maybe none, or maybe there are really so many that we cannot really count them. But I don't want to take more time, so I will leave now to Sophia first, and later to Jörn, to pose a couple of questions to Lena. Please, Sophia.
Thank you very much, Niccolò. And also thank you, Lena, for the presentation, which really summarizes all the key elements of the report, on which I actually have a couple of questions on some elements that you already recalled. The first question relates actually to these many different design elements for contracts for differences. Because basically in the report, but also now you mentioned that many different design elements for CfDs exist. For example, the referencing method, the strike price design. I was wondering if actually we can expect maybe some similar design characteristics in specific areas in the EU. So for example, similar design choices in the same bidding zone or in the same industry or maybe in the same country even. And then my second question, which is composed of like multiple sub-questions, but it's they all relate to this main idea. Because in the report, there is, of course, the mention that contracts for differences, they hedge against different types of risks, but a small degree of risk must be maintained. For example, for the sake of incentives to maximize the value of production, to allow the market to still do its job and propose other hedging solutions. So my question here would be, which are the risks that it makes sense to leave untouched by contracts for differences? Could we have a situation, according to this issue, where in some member states, for example, contracts for differences cover more risks compared to contracts for differences in another member state, and therefore hampering more in some countries than elsewhere the emergence of market solutions for hedging purposes? And if yes, can actually this diversified approach hamper the integration of energy markets that we have in the EU? So this would be my two questions.
Yeah, okay. I think they're very well related, the two questions actually, right? So my first answer, it's maybe not super helpful in general, but I would say, so regarding the risks, right, and how much you need to take away in terms of risks, I would say as little as possible and as much as necessary, right? And you cannot really do anything with that. But I think the underlying idea is that we let the market do as much as it can, right? So this is the first premise. We would like to try to support forward markets as much as we can, right? We only have 6 forward markets, you know, in Europe. It's not super well established in many countries. We maybe tend to forget because we are most of the time talking to the largest or about the largest markets in Europe, right? But yeah, push as much forward as you can with that. You know, also PPAs, it's much better that if there is market participants who want to take over, you know, and who want to be a hedging partner, let them do it as much as possible, right? We have looked into it in the German market, and I think we've come don't quote me on that. Maybe it's not a good thing to say on a public meeting like that, but I think I remember that this is about the current PPA market in Germany, which is one of the most, you know, established PPA markets in Europe. Would need to increase 10 to 12 times, I think, in order to be able to absorb the amount of new renewable investments that need hedging until 2030, right? Something like that, right? It's just ridiculous much, and it's very difficult to see that it will actually, you know, go that. But maybe we can grow it by 3-4 times, right? And then we could be very successful on that, and then we take the rest, you know, that's left over and that's not been able to hedge, we can put into the support schemes, right? And for that, we need to be very sure, and that's also something we discuss in the report, that we are not hampering that market, right? That we design them in a way that we are pushing more and more into the PPA market, right? By, for example, excluding some investments, right? Or by maybe excluding some volumes inside investments to push them over to PPAs, right? And that would be, for example, thinking about how much do I need to hedge from the state in order to achieve bankability, like a minimum amount of bankability. Maybe that's only 80% of the production, right? And then the rest, you know, as much as possible, again, then push into the market. And maybe if they need more hedging, maybe let them hedge, you know. So I think these kind of considerations really is super important. And then regarding the similar choices, yes, definitely. I think it's dependent on the market, right? Because it's a financial derivative we're talking about, we need to have mature financial markets. We need to have volumes and that can be, you know, dealt with. So in those markets that are more established, more mature, more trading, you know, we can also require more of the renewable investors. So I think there definitely those are similarities, right? And also the type of renewable investors, right? I would require more in terms of, you know, being able to hedge risk and being able to make own decisions from a, you know, multi-billion offshore wind investment for a gigawatt. You know, I would require much more from that as compared to a small rooftop investment, you know, in a small country where there is not such a well-established capital market, for example, right? So definitely I would see there some clustering both on the technology side because there are different sizes, unit sizes, but also in terms of the market size. Yeah.
Thank you, Lena and Sophia. Let's move to Jorn. And in the meanwhile, I remind the audience that they can already fill in questions that we will pose to Lena after that. But now let's hear from Jorn, please.
Yes, well, first of all, thanks, Lena, for the very nice report and overview. I mean, I think it's the most comprehensive report I've seen regarding the possible design choices of CfDs, and especially also regarding the existing ways to address distortions in generation-based CfDs. So I can only recommend all listeners to actually dive into all the rich details this report offers. I also like the characterization that the key question is really in how to far expose investors to risks and whether that is productive or not. I mean, are these policy risks or market risks? And where you choose not to expose them to risks, how to correct distortions arising from missing price exposure, and how large are the respective inefficiencies that are arising from each category. So I think the questions I have go a bit into the details. So the first one I would have is, as you say, one of the remaining issues with production-based CfDs are the distortions on intraday and balancing markets. And with the upcoming introduction of intraday auctions, and thus like a clear intraday reference price that will come from these auctions, do you see any advantages and disadvantages in moving to a pure intraday reference price? That would be question number one. And then maybe sort of like coming or attached to that question is, when moving to shorter reference prices and reference periods to achieve better de-risking capabilities of these CfDs, you lose incentives that you need to correct in other ways. And then do you see a trade-off of losing these risks to drive technology choices like wind versus solar and technology neutral auctions in systems where renewable potentials are constrained? And then where you have these short periods, how do you think of instead using bid adjustments in auctions like bonuses for higher system value wind turbines instead of using higher exposure to price risks? So these would be my initial questions. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so regarding the intraday balancing markets, right? So the big distinction at the moment, as you also say, so we don't have these kind of joint auctions, and we have most of the prices that are developing are over the counter, so there is not a good reference currently at the moment, which does not preclude us from actually already, using a reference, a certain type of reference, and we've seen that. I think it's in Spain, where they're actually making, it's not a pure intraday scheme price reference, but they're making a weighted average. They calculate the reference price based on a weighted average between both the day ahead market and the intraday. And in principle, you are free to do that, right? So we also describe how you're free to choose reference market to calculate your reference price. You could even think about having a long-term element in that, right? Longer term, like a financial element. So the idea behind that is, of course, that we would like to, so if we create the reference index in a way that reflects better the actual income from the renewable plant, then it's closer to it, and it's better stabilizing the price, right? So if your actual income is 80% day ahead market and maybe 20% intraday market, then this would be good to actually make it in index because it reflects better what your actual income is about. So the question is, how much, right? So how do you do that index, right? And currently what we're seeing at the moment, I wouldn't expect that the income would move 100% over to intraday. As long as the day ahead exists and there is this, huge liquidity on the trading there. So even if you would create an auction, I would still see that if a lot of the income comes from the day ahead market, that should be also a lot of weight on that, because then it decreases the price basis risk basically in the index. So having said that, also we should think about how this reference pricing would actually impact the behavior of the renewables. And one thing that we don't want to do is to push them not to tell us what they're going to produce, right? We would like them to tell us what they're going to, or what they're expecting to produce next day, right? So if we now indexing on the intraday only, there is a chance that we are kind of nudging them into the intraday more and more, and I'm not so sure that this is a good thing. I have to say I haven't completely analyzed it, but I think this current system where we need to have a pretty good forecast, day ahead with then adjustments intraday is actually quite a good mixture. We can think about having shorter gate closure and reforming that in a way, but I don't think that this would be solved by just moving the reference price. It would be solved by changing the market as such in a way, right? And this is more your area than mine, probably. Right. Then regarding technology choices, so I do think that there is a difference in systems where you have what you say constrained resources, right? So if you don't have very much space left, or you want to push, more towards, for example, rooftop rather than free field solar PV or things like that. I agree. I don't know if I can place any opinion into your question, but I agree in some way that maybe then a pricing rule or a referencing, a methodology is maybe not the best, indirect tool to try to steer in a certain direction. Then probably if you want something, then say it directly and try to actually directly do that, right? And this is also, we have in another research project, looked into, auctions in general and how to, is it better to make technology neutral auctions and then have a bonus and malus, or make technology specific auctions? And the answer is, of course, it depends. It depends on what exactly you want to do. Sometimes it can make sense, but in general, if you have a very specific target for a certain technology, then make a specific auction so that you can make sure that you can get it also, right? It's usually more effective. I would say regarding this, the reference method, right? So in general, what we want to do with the design is to push through as much of the market signal to the technologies as possible, right? And then that would help the technologies to choose, to developers to choose the right technology, right? So if we do an hourly reference price, we just produce and forget, right? Then the solar producer will see the same price in every hour. So then it would make sense for them to build a south-facing plant, because then they produce more if they face the same hours. But as soon as you go for a daily average, or if you go for a weekly average or whatnot, right? So then you're already exposed to changing prices over the day. And then all of a sudden, you're thinking about creating the higher market value. And if you have higher market values in the evening hours, you may really go for a west-facing solar plant instead, because you can up your average price in that way, right? And it depends a little bit on how you're doing the weighting, right? If it's taken into account or if it's leveling out. So, but here, it's not so much specific technology steering from the government side that I want to nudge you into this or that direction. It's more, I will just open the field for you that you can see what the market actually needs, right? And I think that's always a good idea. Right, so a long answer, but I hope it gave you the nuance. I'd be also curious to hear what your thoughts are, to be.
Thank you. Do you want to reply, Jorn? So,
yes, I mean, thanks a lot for the answers. I mean, I think to me makes a lot of sense. I think it's, as you described, there's these different trade-offs, like how to push these risks, what risks can be handled, and what I think is important, maybe also what inefficiencies we expect from these different distortions, or also from passing on risks that are non-productive to producers is on. I also agree. I agree that I think we need to have incentives for project developers to build system-friendly plans, not just to maximize production. And I was wondering whether if you design an auction where you pass like some sort of synthetic profile in the evaluation of the bids, if this might substitute some of it. I think what you lose is sort of the market wisdom in terms of market heterogeneity of opinions, right? And that can be, I think that can be quite worthwhile as well, to have these perspectives and forward-looking instead of passing one central price. I think this was.
I think that's completely right. Yeah, and also one argument, or I'm quite often met with, is that, but you cannot control these renewables anyways, right? So, but let them just produce as much as possible, right? And yes, I agree. And in some systems, it may make sense, right? But if you're operating a system that has more and more renewables, like we do in Denmark, right? We have a lot of times we have more than 100% renewables in the system. Then we need to think about, nudging. And this is not only about, dispatch decisions. It's a lot and mostly about investment decision and technology choices at the investment decision, right? And how you're incentivizing that decision. And then there is scheduled maintenance. There's the way you're operating. So there are actually these decisions that you can be quite active in many areas, more than, I think maybe many people, think when you see, a non-moving solar plant which just sits there. Yeah. So I think there is a lot that you can steer around that as well. Of course, not as much as with some of the controllable plants, but enough, to justify consideration.
Thank you very much. Let's see what the audience would like to ask to our guest. 3 people already typed their questions, so I will start with a question by Alejandro. He asked, what do you think would be the role of national regulatory authorities in the design, implementation, and evaluation of CfDs? In particular, what is the experience concerning the role of NRAs in countries where CfDs are in place? Lena, any view based on your research on implementation at the European level, please?
I think it's a really good question. In my experience, the role of the national regulatory authorities is very limited. So it's usually the ministries or agencies that are authorized by the ministries to design auctions. And then the design is sent to Europe and being approved by DG Competition, right? So I can only assume that they are internal talks, but in an official role, in my experience, quite limited. I might be wrong there, but yeah.
I have your same impression. I mean, there are many NRAs who do not have much competence on support schemes.
Yeah.
I don't know if Jorn or Sophia wants to add anything about this. Jorn?
I mean, from the German side, definitely the design is done by the ministry. The actual auctions are being run by the Bundesnetzagentur, which is the NRA, right? So they, in terms of implementation, that's the only concrete one I know. So I suppose at least the Bundesnetzagentur knows a lot about the actual running of the auctions and seeing these bids, and then also analyzing these bids or asking researchers to do that for them. But yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting question.
So
the design is usually on the ministries, as far as I'm aware, definitely.
In Italy, it's similar, but it's not the regulator. It's a public company, TSA, who runs these auctions.
Yeah.
Let's.
Right. Yeah, and in many other countries, it's also the agencies, right? And,
Let's move to another question. Patricia asks, one of the most important political goals of CfDs is the clawback. Do you really think there will be substantial potential for clawback in the future, apart from crisis situations we have just witnessed? A bit of crystal ball.
It's a very good question. It will depend on the design, right? So if you make the shorter you go in the reference period, the more options you will have for clawback, because then you're going into, but then also you will have payout, and if you think about it, like how it will net out over the overall period. That I think will just depend on if you believe that power prices will go up And if they will go up higher than the strike prices that the governments enter into, right? So it's a question about what do you expect is going to happen on the overall electricity market? Do you believe in enormous amounts of hydrogen production, enormous amounts of new electric vehicles, heat pumps, and other electrification, which would increase the electricity demand? Data centers, AI, I don't know. There's a lot of things that are in the crystal ball that tell us electricity demand might actually rise quite a bit. And then when you know that, how do we match that with the supply? Will there be scarcity or not? Will we have abundant supply? Then of course that will determine what the prices are going to be. And then the question is, will the renewables be able to catch that? How will they relate into the prices? And it might be right that because if we are running this renewable system, we will see lower and lower market value factors from the renewables. And if that happens, then the question is, how do you design your scheme? Will the clawback happen in despite of low market value factors? Then you push the risk of that discrepancy towards the technologies to the investors. Then you might have more clawback. If you don't think that this is productive and leading to investments, then you can accept less clawback, right? And again, well, I can look into the history, and we see quite a large willingness to pay, especially on offshore wind, by the big investors to actually enter into these and accept clawbacks. We've seen several bids recently that suggest there will be clawbacks. And I don't see any reason for why that should deteriorate systematically over time. In that sense, yes, I do think there will be clawbacks. We will be seeing clawbacks in the future. How much that will be, how much will be substantial, I don't know.
I fully agree. It's very hard to predict. Actually, a couple of years ago, this money coming back to some support scheme was basically due to the war and sudden limit availability of gas. Bjorn, do you want to add anything on this?
Maybe just I keep it very short. I wouldn't underestimate the role single years can play over a 20-year time horizon. I mean, we obviously seen that over the war, but I think very often we tend to think in averages over 20-year horizons, and quite often the average is actually quite impacted by the outlier years. And I have a hard time imagining that in the next 20 years we are not going to have an outlier year.
Okay. Running from crisis to crisis.
Maybe not as extreme as the last one, but on the other hand, well, who knows?
So you can imagine, so these are also cycles typical of industries with a lot of fixed assets. Maybe 5-10 years is already a cycle, so 20 years can contain a couple of peaks and shallows. Let's move to another question because we have only 5 minutes. Let's try with the one by Diana. What criteria should be used in CFD design to incentivize co-location of storage with RES? So I assume she's referring to these hybrid plants that have generation but also storage. Any comment, Lena, on this?
I'm actually not so sure that we need incentives to emphasize the role of co-location. In some cases, it might be useful, from an internal project perspective, because you can save on, I don't know, transmission cost or whatnot. But then this should be on the market, so it should be making sense on equal terms with the rest of the competition. So I'm not sure that you should have any additional incentives for co-location. If it makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't, then maybe we should think about more central solutions, because they tend to be the more efficient ones.
Okay, very clear. Marta asked maybe a specific question. I don't know if any of you knows about the details of the Belgian CfD design, in which private PPAs are not fully incentivized. I don't know if by chance you follow this development, Lena or Sophia or Jorn.
Yeah, we do describe the Belgian scheme in the report regarding the PPA arrangement. What was the question exactly?
She asked in general about faults on this design, and she underlines that according to her, the private PPAs are not fully incentivized due to this specific design in Belgium.
Okay, that will probably be a longer discussion. We describe how it works is that the bidders, they can actually opt out of the CfD for some part of the production and then enter into a PPA, which is then of course restricted in terms of how much they can deviate from the one strike price, so that there are no large arbitrage incentives. Maybe that might be problematic, but of course, if you want to do that, there are always different incentives or different interests that need to be taken into account. But so this PPA had to be restricted in some way. I think it would be a larger discussion and maybe also requires more analysis for the sake of the report. And for now, we found it an interesting idea, experiment, solution that where we can actually start to have CfDs and PPAs in parallel. How it really plays out in the real world, we'll have to see and then learn from it. That's maybe as much as we can say.
Okay, so I suggest I encourage Marta to be in touch with Lena to maybe fund a new research on the specific Belgian scheme. And well, there are other questions, but I think our time is running very short. So I think we can close it here. It was very much a pleasure to host Lena, Jorn, and of course, Sophia in this webinar today. You saw that the topic is really important. And I mean, as we said in the title, there is no blunt answer. It really, you need to look at the details, look out the details and the choices you make fit into the context where you apply these support schemes. And only in this way you will be able to understand the implications of such a support scheme in the case you are looking at. So no simple generalistic. It's difficult to generalize, to make simple and always valid statements about CfDs. So again, thank you very much. This was the last FSR Insight before the summer break. Marcia and I will come back in September. We are already cooking a couple of interesting new installments. In the meanwhile, enjoy the summer wherever you are. Have a good afternoon to all of you, and thanks to Clara, who was in the background making this possible.
Thank you so much. And see you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao. Thank you very much.